Hey guys, tonight we slip into the dimly lit, stuffy bedchambers of Victorian England, where insomnia was practically a personality trait. Picture yourself in a creaky four-poster bed, the kind with curtains so heavy they could double as a coffin lid. The gas lamps flicker outside, casting jittery shadows on your wallpaper. Probably arsenic-laced because, Victorians loved their toxic decor. You're tossing and turning, the springs beneath you squeaking like a chorus of grumpy mice. Sleep. Good luck. Most Victorians didn't survive a night without staring at the ceiling for hours, cursing their overactive brains. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your location and local time. I'm curious where you're drifting off from tonight. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're in London, 1875, and the city hums with the clatter of horse-drawn cabs and the distant whistle of steam trains. But inside your bedroom, it's a different kind of chaos. Insomnia wasn't just a personal problem, it was a cultural obsession. Victorians were losing sleep faster than they were losing their empire, and they had a million theories why. The Industrial Revolution had turned night into day. Factories roared 24/7, gaslights burned late, and suddenly everyone was expected to be productive all the time. You're caught in this new rhythm, your body clock as confused as a rooster in a storm. Historians note that sleep complaints skyrocketed in the 19th century, with diaries and letters full of gripes about the sleepless malady. One doctor, William Banting, estimated in 1864 that half of London's middle class lay awake nightly, fretting over bills, social status, or that dodgy pie they ate at supper. But here's the quirky bit. Some Victorians blamed their sleeplessness on overstimulated nerves from reading too many novels. Yes, you heard that right. Your copy of Jane Eyre might be the villain keeping you up. They thought thrilling plots wired the brain, like drinking espresso before bed. You're probably chuckling, but imagine yourself flipping through Dickens by candlelight, heart racing as Pip meets Magwitch, and then wondering why you can't doze off. It's not just novels. The era's obsession with progress meant everyone was overthinking everything. Historians still argue whether this was a real epidemic or just Victorians being dramatic. Spoiler alert, they loved a good moan. So you're lying there, staring at the ceiling's plaster roses, counting them like sheep. The air smells faintly of coal smoke and lavender because someone told you lavender was calming. Spoiler, it's not working. You've tried closing your eyes, but your mind's racing. Did you lock the front door? Will your boss notice you botched that ledger? And why does your neighbour's dog bark only at 3 a.m? This is the Victorian insomnia experience, a mix of existential dread and practical annoyance, all wrapped in itchy wool blankets. You're not alone though. Across town, thousands of others are also awake, some reaching for bizarre remedies we'll explore soon. For now, you're just trying to survive the night, one creaky mattress spring at a time. Let's talk about what's keeping you up. The Victorians had a laundry list of culprits, and not all of them were as poetic as overstimulated nerves. Diet was a big one. You're probably regretting that late-night helping of mutton pie, because heavy, greasy foods were thought to clog the stomach and agitate the brain. Medical journals from the 1870s warned against eating after 7 p.m, but good luck telling that to a factory worker stumbling home at midnight. Then there's the noise. London streets never shut up. You hear the clop of hooves, the shouts of street vendors, and the occasional drunk singing off-key. Even in quieter towns, church bells gong at random hours, because apparently time needed announcing at 4 a.m. Here's a weird tidbit. Some Victorians swore their insomnia came from bad air. They called it miasma, a vague, smelly evil they thought wafted from sewers or damp walls. You're probably sniffing your room now, wondering if that musty corner is sabotaging your sleep. Doctors recommended keeping windows open, even in winter, so you're shivering under a pile of blankets, hoping fresh air will magically knock you out. It doesn't. Instead, you're sneezing and still wide awake. The irony? Those open windows let in more street noise, making things worse. You're starting to see why Victorians were so grumpy about sleep. Let's not forget the beds themselves. You're sprawled on a mattress stuffed with horsehair or straw, which sounds rustic, but feels like lying on a sack of twigs. If you're fancy, you've got a feather bed, but it's lumpy and smells faintly of damp poultry. Pillows are no better. Flat, hard, and probably crawling with dust mites. You're tossing, trying to find a comfortable spot, but every position feels like a compromise. And those bed curtains, they're not just for show. They're supposed to keep out drafts, but they trap heat and make you feel like you're sleeping in a velvet coffin. Fun fact, some doctors claimed heavy curtains caused insomnia by stifling the lungs. You're not sure if that's true, but you're tempted to rip them down just to breathe. By now, you're desperate. You've counted the ceiling roses, recited prayers, and even tried thinking dull thoughts, like mentally balancing your household budget. Nothing works. You're not just awake, you're aware of being awake, which is somehow worse. The Victorians had a term for this, agrypnia, a fancy word for staring into the void of your own exhaustion. Some folks turned to prayer or meditation, but others reached for stronger stuff, potions, pills, and rituals that sound like they belong in a witch's grimoire. You're about to join them, because if you don't sleep soon, you might start hallucinating that the wallpaper's moving. And trust me, with Victorian wallpaper, that's not a fun trip. Let's lighten the mood with a quick joke. Why did the Victorian insomniac hate mornings? Because they never got to sleep through the night to hate them properly. Okay, back to your plight. You're not just fighting your own brain, you're up against a society that's weirdly obsessed with sleep, but terrible at achieving it. And the irony is, Victorians loved talking about rest. They wrote books, articles, even poems about it. But their solutions were often more creative than effective. You're about to dive into their world of bedtime rituals, from the mildly sensible to the downright bizarre. Spoiler, some of these cures might make you glad you're just awake, not drugged or electrocuted. As you lie there, the clock ticks louder, each second a tiny jab at your patience. You're starting to wonder if sleep is a myth, like unicorns, or affordable rent in London. But don't despair yet. Victorians had a whole arsenal of insomnia fixes, and you're about to try them all. From potions that taste like regret to gadgets that look like torture devices. The journey's about to get weird. For now, you're still in that creaky bed, the city buzzing outside, your mind a whirlwind of half-formed thoughts. Close your eyes. Just kidding. You already tried that. Let's see what happens when you reach for the first remedy on the shelf. You're still in that creaky Victorian bed, the kind that groans every time you shift, as if it's personally offended by your restlessness. The air's thick with the scent of lavender. Someone swore it'd help, but it's just giving you a headache. Your eyes are gritty, your patience thinner than the worn-out sheet beneath you. It's time to try something, anything, to trick your brain into sleep. Welcome to the world of Victorian bedtime rituals, where preparation for rest was less about cozy vibes and more like gearing up for a bizarre experiment. You're about to fumble through a series of odd habits and gadgets that Victorians swore by, hoping one might finally knock you out. Picture yourself sitting up, the candle on your bedside table spitting wax like it's got a grudge. First, you reach for a nightcap, not the drink, but the actual hat. Victorians were obsessed with these floppy cotton caps, believing they kept your head warm and somehow sealed in sleep. You pull one on, and it's like wearing a deflated balloon. It slips over your eyes every time you move, which is less soothing than it sounds. Historically, these caps were a staple. Queen Victoria herself reportedly wore one embroidered with roses. But does it help? Not really. You're still awake, now with a sweaty forehead and a faint sense of looking ridiculous. Next, you try a ritual straight out of an 1870s housekeeping manual. The foot bath. You drag a chipped porcelain basin from under the bed, fill it with lukewarm water, and dunk your feet in. The idea is that warm feet draw blood from the brain, calming your thoughts. You're skeptical, but you give it a go, splashing water on the floorboards in the process. The water's tepid, and the only thing it's drawing is a shiver up your spine. Some doctors, like William Hammond in his 1883 book Sleep and Its Derangements, swore by this, claiming it redistributed vital energies. You're mostly just annoyed at the puddle you'll have to mop up later. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorians took this footbath obsession to the next level with mustard. Yes, mustard. You're instructed to mix a tablespoon of mustard powder into the water, supposedly to stimulate circulation. You try it, and now your room smells like a questionable sandwich. Your feet tingle, sure, but sleep? Still a distant dream. The mustard bath was a folk remedy, especially in rural areas, and while it sounds like something your eccentric aunt would swear by, it's about as effective as wishing on a star. You're starting to suspect Victorians were just throwing random ingredients at insomnia and hoping for the best. Let's pause for a quick joke. Why did the Victorian foot bath fail? Because the only thing it cured was a fear of cold toes. Okay, back to your nighttime saga. You're not done with rituals yet. Next up is the airing of the bed. You've read in a ladies' magazine that a properly prepared bed is key to sleep. So you fling back the blankets and wave them around like you're signaling a ship. The goal is to refresh the linens with fresh air because apparently stale sheets keep you awake. You're flapping away, feeling like a servant in a bad melodrama, but all you're doing is stirring up dust. Historians still argue whether this was about hygiene or just another Victorian obsession with purity in all things, including sleep. Now, let's talk gadgets. You spot a strange contraption on your bedside table, a sleep posture corrector. It's a leather strap with buckles, meant to keep you from rolling onto your back, because some doctors claimed back sleeping caused cerebral congestion. You wrestle it on, and it's like being hugged by a particularly judgy octopus. Every time you shift, the straps dig in, reminding you to stay on your side. This was a real thing, patented in the 1880s by a Dr. John P. Gray, who thought posture was the key to rest. Spoiler, it's not. You're more uncomfortable than ever, and the straps are leaving marks that'll be fun to explain tomorrow. You decide to try one more ritual, the bedtime prayer. Victorians were big on spiritual fixes, and many believed a quiet prayer could soothe the soul into sleep. You kneel by the bed, muttering a few lines about peace and rest, but your mind's still racing. Did you forget to pay the milkman? The prayer's nice, but it's not exactly a lullaby. Some households took this further, reading entire Bible chapters aloud, hoping the droning would bore them into slumber. You give it a try, flipping to Psalms, but the flickering candlelight makes the words swim. You're bored, sure, but not sleepy. Let's lighten things up again. Why did the Victorians say prayers before bed? Because even God couldn't sleep through their snoring neighbours. Okay, back to business. You're running out of patience, and the rituals aren't cutting it. The nightcap's crooked, your feet smell like a deli, and the posture correctors, making you feel like a trussed-up turkey. But there's one more gadget catching your eye, a vibratory pillow. It's a lumpy cushion stuffed with mechanical bits that supposedly hums you to sleep. You give it a shake, and it buzzes like a disgruntled bee. Patented in 1879, these were sold as soothing devices, but it's like lying on a malfunctioning clock. You're half expecting it to explode. By now, your room's a mess. Water on the floor, blankets in a heap, and a mustardy stench lingering. You're starting to wonder if these rituals are the cause of your insomnia, not the cure. The Victorians were earnest, you'll give them that. But their bedtime prep was a mix of superstition, bad science, and sheer desperation. You're tempted to chuck the nightcap out the window and call it a night, but something tells you the next step might be even wilder. For now, you're still awake, the candle burning low, and the city outside reminding you that sleep is a luxury you're not getting tonight. You're back in that stuffy Victorian bedroom, the candle now a stub, its flame flickering like it's as tired as you are. The nightcap's slipped off, the mustard foot bath is a distant smelly memory, and you're still staring at the ceiling, counting cracks instead of sheep. Desperation's setting in, and you're ready to try something stronger, something that promises sleep but comes with a warning label straight out of a Gothic novel. Enter laudanum, the Victorian era's go-to sleep aid, a potion so popular it was practically a household staple. You're about to discover why this dark, syrupy liquid was both a godsend and a gamble. You reach for a small glass bottle on your nightstand, its label faded but promising restorative slumber. Laudanum's a mix of opium and alcohol, and in 1875, it's as common as aspirin is today. You pour a few drops into a spoon, hesitating because, well, you're not an idiot. You've heard the stories. This stuff's potent, and overdosing is easier than misjudging your tea strength. Historically, laudanum was a blockbuster drug. By the 1860s, Britain was importing tons of opium, and pharmacists sold it over the counter. Everyone from poets to factory workers swore by it for everything. Headaches, nerves, or, in your case, sleepless nights. You swallow the dose, and it tastes like regret mixed with cheap wine. The room softens at the edges, your thoughts slowing, like molasses. For a moment you think, this might actually work. Your eyelids droop, and the creaky bed feels less like a torture device. But here's the catch. Laudanum's a fickle friend. Too little, and you're still awake. Too much, and you're not waking up at all. Medical records from the era show thousands died from accidental overdoses, with coroner's reports listing laudanum poisoning as a grimly common cause. You're careful, but the risk lingers like the aftertaste. Let's toss in a quirky tidbit. Some Victorians got so hooked they carried laudanum in tiny jeweled vials like wearable drugstores. You're picturing it now. A fancy lady at a ball, sipping her sleep tonic between dances. You don't have a jeweled vial, just this plain bottle. But the allure's the same. It's not just about sleep, it's about escaping the noise. In your head, those endless worries about bills, social slights, or that time you accidentally snubbed your neighbor at church. Laudanum promises a shortcut to oblivion, and you're tempted to take another sip. Here's a quick joke to keep things light. Why did the Victorian love laudanum? Because it was the only thing sleepier than their sermons. Okay, back to your hazy experiment. The drug's kicking in, but it's not all dreamy bliss. Your stomach's queasy, and your thoughts are wandering to weird places, like, did you really see a shadow move in the corner? Laudanum's side effects include vivid dreams, sometimes nightmares, which is why some users swore it made insomnia worse. You're starting to see their point. Your mind's drifting, but it's not exactly to dreamland. Instead, you're imagining your wallpaper's peacock pattern coming to life, which is more unsettling than soothing. Historians still argue whether laudanum's popularity was driven by medical need or social pressure. The Victorian obsession with nervous disorders meant everyone was diagnosing themselves with something, and laudanum was the catch-all fix. Doctors prescribed it like candy, but they weren't clueless. By the 1870s, medical journals like The Lancet were warning about addiction. You're feeling that pull now, the warmth spreading through your limbs, whispering, one more drop won't hurt. But you resist, because you've read about people like Mary Todd Lincoln, who got so dependent she could barely function. You're not about to join that club. Let's paint the scene. You're slumped against your lumpy pillow, the laudanum bottle glinting in the candlelight. The city outside is quieter now, the street vendors gone, but a distant dog's bark keeps you tethered to reality. Your heart's beating slower, but your mind's still half awake, caught in a foggy limbo. You're thinking about how Victorians didn't just use laudanum for sleep. They gave it to kids for teething, to wives for hysteria, even to horses for colic. It's a wonder anyone survived the era. You're grateful for your small dose, but the queasiness is a reminder. This isn't a long-term plan. Here's another light jab. Why was laudanum the Victorians' best friend? Because it never talked back, unlike their neighbours. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to feel the downside of this experiment. Your mouth's dry, your head's heavy, and sleep's still playing hard to get. The problem with laudanum is it doesn't guarantee rest, just a kind of dazed stupor. Some users reported waking up more tired, their bodies sluggish from the opium's grip. You're not there yet, but you're wondering if you should have stuck with the mustard foot bath, smelly as it was. You glance at the bottle again, tempted, but wary. The Victorians didn't have warning labels, but they had cautionary tales. Newspapers loved reporting on laudanum widows who lost husbands to a bad dose. You're not about to make headlines, so you push the bottle away. Still, you can't help but marvel at how this stuff was everywhere. Corner shops sold it, grocers stocked it, even travelling peddlers hawked it alongside ribbons and soap. It was the ultimate quick fix in an era that didn't have time for slow solutions. You're starting to see why people clung to it, even if it was like playing roulette with your consciousness. By now, the candle's almost out, and your room's a mix of shadows and laudanum haze. You're not sure if you're closer to sleep or just too woozy to care. The bed's still creaky, the air still smells faintly of coal smoke, and your neighbour's dog is definitely plotting against you. You're learning the hard way that Victorian insomnia cures were less about science and more about hope, and a touch of madness. Laudanum's given you a taste of that, but you're not sold. Maybe it's time to try something else, something less likely to make you see dancing peacocks on the wallpaper. You're back in your Victorian bedroom, the laudanum bottle safely tucked away after its fuzzy, questionable performance. The candle's down to a stub, casting a weak glow that makes your wallpaper's peacock pattern look like it's judging. Your head's clearer now, but sleep's still playing hard to get, like a cat that only comes when it feels like it. You're desperate enough to try anything, so you turn to the next Victorian insomnia fix: herbal brews. These concoctions, steeped in folklore and questionable botany, promise to lull you into dreamland. Spoiler: they're about as reliable as that time you tried to relax by balancing your checkbook. You shuffle to a small table where a chipped teapot sits, filled with a brew your neighbour swore by. It's a mix of chamomile, valerian root, and something called hops. Not the beer kind, but the plant, which smells like a damp forest floor. You pour a cup, the steam carrying a whiff of earth and regret. Victorians loved their herbal teas. By the 1870s, apothecaries were churning out recipes like they were auditioning for a witch's cookbook. One popular guide, Mrs. Beeton's Book of Household Management, 1861, listed chamomile as a gentle sedative. You take a sip, and it's like drinking lawn clippings. Soothing? Debatable. The taste isn't the worst part. Valerian, the star of this brew, smells like old socks left in a rain barrel. You gag, but keep sipping, because desperation makes you do weird things. Historically, valerian was a big deal. Doctors like John Abernethy prescribed it for nervous exhaustion, claiming it calmed the mind. You're not feeling calm. You're feeling like you've betrayed your taste buds. Still, you persist, hoping the promised drowsiness kicks in. Your neighbour, who's probably awake too, said her aunt slept like a baby after this stuff. You're starting to suspect her aunt was just fainting from the flavour. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorians added lettuce juice to their sleep teas, believing it had opium-like powers. Yes, lettuce. You're picturing it now, squeezing a head of romaine into your teapot like some deranged gardener. Apparently, wild lettuce, not the salad kind, has a mild sedative effect, and 19th century herbalists were all over it. You're not that desperate yet, but you're eyeing the wilting cabbage in your kitchen, wondering if it's worth a shot. Spoiler, it's not. The lettuce craze was more wishful thinking than science, but it's a reminder that Victorians would try anything to catch a nap. Let's lighten the mood with a joke. Why did the Victorian drink herbal tea? Because coffee was too busy keeping them awake. Okay, back to your sip and wince routine. The tea's going down slowly, each gulp a test of willpower. You're trying to focus on the soothing part, but your tongue's staging a protest. The room's still stuffy, the bed still creaky, and that distant dog's bark is now a personal vendetta. You're starting to wonder if sleep's just a myth, like affordable coal or polite cab drivers. But you keep drinking, because the alternative is lying there, counting ceiling cracks again. Historians still argue whether these herbal brews did anything beyond placebo. Some, like chamomile, have mild sedative properties, backed by modern studies. But the doses Victorians used were often too weak to matter. Others, like valerian, could work but needed precise preparation, something your average sleep-deprived Londoner wasn't great at. You're no apothecary, so your tea's probably just hot leaf water. Still, there's something oddly comforting about the ritual. Stirring, pouring, sipping. It's like you're doing something, even if that something tastes like a garden's bad day. Let's set the scene. You're hunched over your table, the teacup warm in your hands, the candlelight making your shadow dance like it's mocking your efforts. Outside, a fog's rolling in, muffling the city's usual clamour. You're trying to believe in this brew, imagining it's weaving some ancient herbal magic, but your eyelids aren't drooping. They're defiant, like two tiny rebels staging a sit-in. You try another recipe from a dog-eared pamphlet. Hops and lemon balm this time. It's marginally better, like drinking a hedge instead of a swamp. You're not sure if it's helping or if you're just too tired to care. Here's another quick joke. Why did the Victorian tea fail? Because it was brewed with decaf. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to notice a pattern with these cures. They're less about science and more about hope dressed up in fancy bottles or teapots. The hops in your brew were a favourite among rural folk who stuffed them into pillows for extra sleep vibes. You're tempted to try that next, but the thought of sewing a pillowcase full of beer-flavoured weeds feels like too much work. Plus, your sewing skills are as shaky as your nerves right now. By now your teacup's empty and you're feeling something. Not sleepy exactly, but a kind of fuzzy resignation. Maybe it's the chamomile, or maybe it's just exhaustion winning. You're remembering that laudanum haze from earlier. Yep, those dancing peacocks on the wallpaper. And this tea's a safer bet, even if it's less exciting. The Victorians loved their herbs because they were cheap and accessible, unlike laudanum, which could bankrupt you or worse. Apothecaries sold these brews to everyone, from scullery maids to society ladies, promising natural repose. You're not feeling repose, but you're not seeing shadows move anymore. So that's progress. You set the teacup down, the clink echoing in the quiet room. The fog outside's thicker now, turning the gas lamps into blurry halos. You're tempted to brew another pot, maybe try that lettuce nonsense, but your stomach's already staging a mild revolt. The herbal root's not the miracle you hoped for, but it's a step up from mustard foot baths. You're learning that Victorian insomnia cures are a mix of earnest effort and wild guesswork, like throwing darts at a dream. For now, you're still awake, the bed calling, but not promising much. Maybe it's time to see what the professionals have to say about your sleepless nights. You're back in your creaky Victorian bed, the herbal tea's bitter aftertaste lingering like a bad decision. The candle's gone out, leaving you in near darkness, save for the faint glow of a gas lamp seeping through your window. You're still awake, your mind buzzing like a telegraph wire, and the tea's done nothing but make you need to pee. Desperate for sleep, you decide it's time to consult the experts. Victorian physicians, those quirky, self-proclaimed sleep saviors, who roamed the 1870s with stethoscopes and questionable advice. You're about to meet a parade of doctors whose cures range from mildly helpful to downright bizarre. You imagine yourself trudging through London's foggy streets to a doctor's office, the kind with a brass plaque and a waiting room that smells of carbolic acid. Your physician, Dr. Ebenezer Pritchard, a name you're pretty sure he made up, greets you with a monocle and a mustache that could double as a broom. He's one of thousands of sleep specialists popping up in the Victorian era, capitalizing on the insomnia craze. By the 1870s, medical books like The Science of Sleep by Dr. William Hammond were hot off the press, claiming insomnia was a disease of civilization. You're starting to believe it, given how your brain refuses to shut off. Dr. Pritchard sits you down and starts with the basics. Your lifestyle's all wrong. He blames your sleeplessness on overtaxed nerves from reading too many newspapers, because apparently staying informed is a health risk. He's not entirely off base. Historians note that the Victorian middle class was obsessed with keeping up with the news, which often meant late-night reading by gaslight. You nod sheepishly, recalling That article about a runaway omnibus that kept you up past midnight. But Pritchard's not here to lecture. He's got cures, and they're as eccentric as his mustache. First, he prescribes a nerve tonic made of bromide of potassium, a salt that's supposed to calm your frazzled brain. You take a sip from the vial he hands you, and it tastes like salty regret. Bromides were huge in the 1870s. Doctors like Sir Charles Locock swore they soothed everything from epilepsy to sleeplessness. You feel a slight drowsiness, but it's hard to tell if it's the bromide or just boredom from Pritchard's droning voice. The downside, bromides could make you sluggish, and overuse led to bromism, a condition that left patients with rashes and confusion. You're not thrilled about that prospect, but you're desperate enough to try. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some doctors, including Pritchard's rival across town, recommended cranial compression for insomnia. Picture this. You're lying on a table while the doctor wraps your head in a tight bandage, claiming it'll rebalance your cerebral fluids. You politely decline because getting mummified doesn't sound like a ticket to dreamland. This was a real fad though, inspired by phrenology, that pseudoscience where head bumps supposedly revealed your personality. You're glad Pritchard's not that kind of doctor, but you're starting to wonder about his credentials. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Victorian doctor love insomnia patients? Because they paid for his new mustache wax. Okay, back to your consultation. Pritchard's not done yet. He pulls out a chart and lectures you on hygienic sleep rules. No eating after 6 p.m, no exciting novels, and, here's the kicker, no thinking too hard before bed. You're tempted to ask how you're supposed to not think, but he's already moved on to his next cure, a daily walk. He insists you stroll for an hour each evening, ideally in a park, to harmonize your vital energies. You try it, trudging, through Hyde Park as horse carriages rattle by, but all you get is sore feet and a face full of fog. Historians still argue whether these early sleep doctors were onto something or just profiting off desperation. Bromides had some sedative effect, and exercise like walking could help, but the science was shaky. Doctors often mix solid advice with nonsense, like telling you to sleep with your head facing north to align with magnetic currents. You give Pritchard a side eye when he mentions this, but he's deadly serious. You're not about to rearrange your bedroom for magnetism, especially since your bed's too heavy to budge without a small army. Let's set the scene. You're back home now, the bromide tonic sitting uneasily in your stomach. The room's chilly, the window open because Pritchard insisted fresh air purifies the lungs. You're bundled in blankets, trying to recall his other tips, something about avoiding tea and keeping your feet warm. You're already forgetting half of it, which is probably for the best. The city's quiet now, save for the occasional clop of hooves outside. You're picturing Pritchard's moustache, wondering if it's the real brains behind his operation. The bromide's making you a bit woozy, but sleep's still elusive, like a friend who keeps cancelling plans. Here's another quick joke. Why was the Victorian doctor's office so busy? Because nobody slept on his advice. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to see why these doctors were both revered and ridiculed. They meant well, but their cures often leaned on guesswork or old wives' tales dressed up as science. Pritchard's final suggestion is a rest cure. Basically, lying in bed all day to store up sleep. You try it for an hour, staring at the ceiling, but it just makes you more restless. You're remembering that laudanum haze, those dancing peacocks again, and the herbal tea's swampy taste, and you're not sure this doctor's any better. By now, you're back in bed, the bromide's faint buzz wearing off. The room smells faintly of coal smoke and disappointment. You're wondering if you should have stuck with the mustard footbath, or even that weird nightcap from earlier. Victorian doctors like Pritchard were part of a growing medical industry, but their insomnia fixes were hit or miss. You're learning that sleep in this era was less about science and more about throwing darts at the problem. For now, you're still awake, the city humming outside, and Pritchard's voice echoing in your head. Maybe it's time to see what other oddballs have in store for your sleepless nights. You're back in your dimly lit Victorian bedroom, the bromide tonic's salty aftertaste fading. but sleep's still as distant as a polite London cab driver. The bed creaks beneath you, and the open window lets in a chilly fog that smells faintly of coal and regret. Dr. Pritchard's advice was a bust. His mustache had more authority than his cures. Now, you're ready to try something even stranger, something whispered about in hushed tones at society gatherings. Hypnotism. Yes, you're about to let a so-called mesmerist tinker with your mind, hoping their peculiar trance will finally send you to dreamland. Buckle up. This one's as weird as it sounds. You imagine yourself trudging to a dimly lit parlour in Bloomsbury, where a hypnotist named Madame Celeste awaits. Her office is all velvet curtains and flickering oil lamps, with a faint whiff of incense that's probably covering up something worse. She's got a piercing stare and a pocket watch that swings like it's auditioning for a melodrama. Hypnotism was a Victorian sensation. By the 1870s, it was gaining traction thanks to figures like James Braid, who called it neurohypnotism and swore it could cure everything from nerves to insomnia. You're skeptical but desperate, so you settle into a plush chair and let her begin. Madame Celeste starts swinging that watch, her voice low and rhythmic, telling you to relax your limbs and sink into repose. You're trying to focus on the watch, but your mind's wandering. Did you lock the back door? Is that fog getting thicker? The idea is that her trance will quiet your brain, bypassing the worries keeping you awake. Historically, hypnotism was a big deal. Medical journals like The Lancet reported cases where patients fell into deep, restful sleep after sessions. You're hoping for that. But right now, you're just feeling like a kid caught staring out a window during class. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some hypnotists claimed they could make you cluck like a chicken to cure insomnia. No, really. There's a story from an 1878 London newspaper about a mesmerist who had patients mimic animals to release nervous tension. Madame Celeste doesn't go that far, but she does suggest you imagine yourself as a calm river. You try picturing a babbling brook, but it just makes you need to pee again. You're starting to think this trance is less about sleep and more about testing your patience. Let's lighten the mood with a joke. Why did the Victorian hypnotist fail? Because her patients kept waking up to applaud. Okay, back to your session. Madame Celeste's voice is soothing. Sure, but your eyelids aren't drooping. Instead, you're hyper-aware of the chair's lumpy cushion and the faint creak of floorboards upstairs. She's telling you to let go of earthly cares, but your cares are stubborn. Rent's due, and that neighbour's dog is back at it with the barking. You're trying to believe in this, but it feels like a parlour trick gone wrong. Historians still argue whether Victorian hypnotism was science or showmanship. Braid's work laid the groundwork for modern hypnosis, but many practitioners were closer to stage magicians than doctors. Some patients swore by it, claiming they slept for days after a session, while others, like you, just felt awkward and slightly cheated. You're starting to suspect Madame Celeste's real talent is making you feel like you're the problem for not falling asleep. Still, you keep staring at that watch, hoping for a miracle. The room's warm, the incense cloying, and your thoughts are starting to blur, but it's hard to tell if it's hypnotism or just exhaustion creeping in. Let's set the scene. You're slouched in that chair, the watch swinging like a metronome, Madame Celeste's voice droning on about deep, endless slumber. Outside, the fog muffles the clatter of carriages, and the lamps cast eerie shadows that look suspiciously like dancing peacocks. Yep, that laudanum memory's still haunting you. You're trying to relax, but your brain's like a horse that won't be reined in. You recall that herbal tea, the one that tasted like a swamp, and Dr. Pritchard's bromide nonsense, and you're wondering if hypnotism's just another stop on this sleepless merry-go-round. Here's another quick joke. Why was the hypnotist's watch so tired? It was always swinging overtime. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to feel something. A heaviness in your limbs, maybe a flicker of calm. But just as you think you're drifting, Madame Celeste snaps her fingers, claiming it'll seal the trance. Spoiler, it doesn't. You're back to square one, blinking at her like she just sold you a broken clock. She insists you need multiple sessions, which smells like a sales pitch. You're not sure if you're more annoyed at her or at yourself for thinking this might work. By now, you're back in your bedroom. The fog thicker outside, the room colder. You've spent good money on Madame Celeste, and all you've got is a headache and a vague sense of being swindled. Hypnotism's allure was its promise of control over your mind, your sleep, your sanity. But it's clear you're not there yet. The Victorians loved this stuff because it felt modern, like they were unlocking the brain's secrets. You're just unlocking a new level of frustration. The bed's still creaky, the night's still long, and you're wondering what other, strange cures this era has in store. Maybe it's time to ditch the experts and browse the chemist's shelf for something new. You're back in your drafty Victorian bedroom, the memory of Madame Celeste's swinging watch still making you dizzy. The fog outside is so thick it's like the city's holding its breath, and your bed's creaks are starting to sound like a personal insult. Hypnotism was a bust, leaving you with nothing but a lighter purse and a lingering suspicion that you're better at staying awake than anyone in London. Now you're turning to the next big Victorian insomnia fix: patent medicines. These bottled miracles sold in every chemist's shop promise sleep with names as flashy as their claims. You're about to browse a shelf of dubious tonics and elixirs, hoping one might finally quiet your restless mind. You imagine yourself standing in a cluttered apothecary, its shelves groaning with colourful bottles, green, amber, blue, each labelled with promises like Dr. Zephyr's sleep elixir or moonlit repose tonic. The air smells of camphor and old wood, and the chemist, a wiry man with spectacles perched on his nose, swears these are the answer to your sleepless nights. Patent medicines were a Victorian craze. By the 1870s, Britain's pharmaceutical industry was booming, with over 10,000 brands registered, many targeting insomnia. You pick up a bottle of chlorodyne, a popular mix of chloroform, cannabis, and opium. Sounds like a party, but it's just another risky sleep aid. You pour a dose into a spoon, the liquid glinting like liquid twilight. It tastes like burnt sugar and medicine, with a kick that makes your eyes water. Chlorodyne was a bestseller, endorsed by doctors and ads claiming it soothes the brain in minutes. You're waiting for that soothing, but all you feel is a warm buzz, like the laudanum from earlier but less trippy. Historically, these medicines were barely regulated. Parliament's 1868 Pharmacy Act tried to curb the chaos, but dodgy tonics still flooded the market. You're starting to wonder if this bottle's more snake oil than science. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some patent medicines were spiked with cocaine, marketed as invigorating sleep aids. You're picturing it now, a bottle labelled Dr. Sparks Vitality Drops, promising to both wake you up and put you to sleep. The logic's as shaky as your nerves, but Victorians bought it, literally. Your chlorodyne doesn't have cocaine, you hope, but the label's vague about what's in it, which is unsettling. You're sipping cautiously, remembering those dancing peacocks from your laudanum adventure. The last thing you need is more wallpaper wildlife. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Victorian love patent medicines? Because they cured everything except their empty wallets. Okay, back to your experiment. The chlorodyne's kicking in, and your head feels like it's wrapped in cotton wool. Not sleepy, just muffled. You're squinting at other bottles on your imaginary shelf. Soothing syrup, probably just sugar water, and lunar tonic, smells like gin with a side of herbs. These medicines were everywhere. Ads in the Times promised instant slumber for a shilling. And desperate, insomniacs like you were easy prey. You're tempted to try another, but your stomach's already grumbling from the first. Historians still argue whether patent medicines were a public health disaster or a placebo-driven miracle. Some, like chlorodyne, had active ingredients that could sedate, but doses were inconsistent, and side effects ranged from nausea to addiction. Medical journals from the 1870s warned about patent medicine mania, but the public couldn't get enough. You're starting to see why, when you're this tired, you'll try anything, even if it tastes like a chemist's fever dream. The bottle's label says, "Take sparingly," but good luck figuring out what that means. You're not about to down the whole thing, but the temptation's there. Let's set the scene. You're back in your bedroom, the chlorodyne bottle on your nightstand. Its green glass catching the faint glow of a relit candle. The fog outside muffles the usual street noises, but that neighbor's dog is still barking, because of course it is. Your head's foggy too, not from sleep, but from whatever's in this tonic. You're remembering Dr. Pritchard's bromide, salty regret, and Madame Celeste's watch, dizzying letdown, and you're wondering if this is just another dead end. The tonic's making you drowsy, but it's a restless kind, like you're floating in a pool of warm syrup. Here's another quick joke. Why was the patent medicine so popular? It put your wallet to sleep first. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to feel the downside of these elixirs. They promise the moon but deliver a headache. Some Victorians swore by them, claiming a single dose sent them to dreamland, but others ended up hooked, chasing sleep with bigger and bigger doses. You're cautious, sipping just enough to test the waters. The chemist's words echo in your head. 1 spoon and you'll sleep like a babe. You're not feeling baby-like, unless babies spend their nights staring at ceilings and cursing bad purchases. By now, your room's a museum of failed cures. Laudanum's bottle, the herbal, tea's teapot, and now this chlorodyne, which might as well be labelled hope in a bottle. The Victorians loved these medicines because they felt modern, like a shortcut to health in a world that was moving too fast. You're learning that speed came at a cost. Your tongue's still tingling, and your stomach's not thrilled. The bed's still creaky, the fog's still thick, and sleep's still playing coy. Maybe it's time to ditch the bottles and try something simpler, something your grandmother might have sworn by. For now, you're stuck in this hazy limbo, wondering, what's next on this sleepless ride? You're back in your Victorian bedroom, the chlorodyne bottle now a dubious decoration on your nightstand, its promises of sleep as empty as your hopes. The fog outside has thickened, turning the gas lamps into ghostly smudges, and your bed's creaks are starting to feel like a personal vendetta. The patent medicines left you woozy but stubbornly awake, your tongue still rebelling against its chemical aftertaste. You're done with risky elixirs for now. Time to try something simpler, something your grandmother might have whispered about over a flickering hearth. Welcome to the world of Victorian nightcaps and warm milk, the homespun bedtime drinks that promise to lull you into slumber with comforting familiarity. Spoiler, they're not as cozy as they sound. You shuffle to your tiny kitchen, the floorboards cold under your bare feet, and set a small pot on the stove. Warm milk was a Victorian go-to, praised in household manuals like Cassell's Household Guide, 1869, for its soothing properties. You pour some milk, probably from a questionable jug. Refrigeration's not a thing yet, so it's a bit tangy. You heat it slowly, the steam rising with a faint, creamy scent that's almost comforting. The idea is that milk's natural warmth calms the stomach, and, by extension, the mind. You're skeptical, but after the laudanum haze and chlorodynes, weird buzz, you're ready for something that won't make your wallpaper dance. You take a sip, and it's fine, warm, slightly sweet, but not exactly a ticket to dreamland. Victorians swore by this, especially for kids, but adults like you were just as likely to chug it in hopes of rest. Some added a pinch of nutmeg, claiming it was a mild sedative. You sprinkle some in, and it tastes like a holiday gone wrong, cozy but not sleepy. Historically, milk was a staple because it was cheap and accessible, unlike those fancy tonics. Doctors like William Banting, in his 1864 sleep pamphlet called It Nature's Balm, you're not feeling balmed, just mildly full and a bit gassy. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorians spiked their milk with a splash of ale, creating a drink called posset. You're picturing it now, pouring a slosh of flat beer into your milk, hoping it's the magic combo. It's not. You try it, and it tastes like something you'd feed a cow, not drink yourself. Possets were a rural favourite, mentioned in diaries from the 1870s, but they're about as soothing as a kick from said cow. You're starting to think your grandmother's advice was less about science and more about using up leftovers. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Victorian drink warm milk? Because cold milk kept moving them awake. Okay, back to your kitchen experiment. You're back at the stove, stirring another batch, this time trying a nightcap recipe from a dog-eared cookbook. This one's milk with honey and a dash of brandy. Basically, a boozy dessert. The brandy burns going down, but it's a step up from the ale disaster. Victorians loved their nightcaps, not the hat kind, though you're still annoyed about that floppy cap. But alcoholic drinks meant to settle the nerves. You're settling something, all right? Your stomach's now staging a mild revolt. Historians still argue whether these drinks worked or if they were just comforting rituals. Milk's tryptophan might help sleep in theory, but you'd need gallons to feel it. And the alcohol in possets, or brandy-laced drinks, often disrupted sleep cycles. Medical journals from the 1870s were starting to question booze as a sleep aid, but households clung to tradition. You're clinging too, sipping your honey brandy milk, hoping the warmth will trick your brain. It doesn't. Your mind's still racing. Did you pay the coal bill? Is that dog barking again? The milk's cozy, but it's not knocking you out. Let's set the scene. You're back in bed, a half-empty mug of brandy milk on the nightstand, the room smelling faintly of nutmeg and disappointment. The fog outside muffles the city, but that neighbor's dog is relentless, like it's auditioning for your nightmares. You're remembering the laudanum's dancing peacocks, the herbal tea's swampy taste, and the chlorodyne's weird buzz. This milk's gentler, sure, but it's not delivering. You try another variation, milk with cinnamon, because some apothecary swore it balances the humours. It tastes like a spicy candle, and your humours are anything but balanced. Here's another quick joke. Why was the Victorian nightcap so weak? Because it was drunk on promises. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to see the pattern with these cures. They're less about results and more about hope, like buying a lottery ticket for sleep. The brandy's left you a bit fuzzy, but it's a restless fuzz, not the deep slumber you're chasing. You're picturing Victorian families huddled around their hearths, passing around possets like it's a sacred ritual. Maybe it was the routine, not the drink, that mattered. Something to do when the night stretched on endlessly. By now your mug's empty, and you're back under the heavy blankets, the bed creaking like it's mocking you. The milk's warmth is fading, and your eyelids are as stubborn as ever. The Victorians loved these drinks because they felt like a hug from simpler times, before patent medicines and hypnotists took over. You're not feeling hugged, just bloated and mildly tipsy. The fog's still thick, the room's still cold, and sleep's still playing coy. Maybe it's time to look at the bed itself. Surely the problem's not just what you're drinking, but where you're trying to sleep. You're back in your Victorian bedroom, the brandy-laced milk sitting heavy in your stomach, its faint warmth no match for the chill creeping through the room. The fog outside is a thick curtain muffling the city's usual clamour, but that neighbour's dog is still barking because apparently sleep deprivation is its life's mission. The nightcap drink was a cosy letdown, and you're starting to think the problem might not be what you're sipping, but where you're lying. Your bed, lumpy, creaky, and about as comforting as a sack of rocks, is the next suspect in your Insomnia saga. You're about to wrestle with the heavy, suffocating world of Victorian bedding, where mattresses and pillows were less about comfort and more about endurance. Picture yourself staring at your bed, a hulking four-poster that looks like it was designed to intimidate. The mattress is stuffed with horsehair, which sounds rustic, but feels like lying on a bristly doormat. If you're lucky, you've got a feather bed on top, but it's clumped into lumps that shift like quicksand. By the 1870s, bedding was a status symbol. Wealthy Victorians boasted about their feather mattresses, while the working class made do with straw or wool. You're somewhere in the middle, stuck with a horsehair monstrosity that creaks every time you breathe. Historical records, like those in the Furniture Gazette, 1875, describe mattresses as essential to healthful repose. But yours feels like it's plotting against you. You flop onto the bed, and it groans like an offended grandparent. The horsehair pokes through the ticking, pricking your skin through your nightshirt. You try to fluff the feather bed, but it's like wrestling. A grumpy cloud, feathers puff out, and now your room smells like a damp henhouse. Doctors of the era, like Dr. Andrew Wilson in his 1879 health manual, insisted that a firm mattress was key to sleep, claiming soft ones caused spinal misalignment. You're not sure about your spine, but your patience is definitely misaligned. The bed's so hard it's like sleeping on a carpenter's workbench. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorians stuffed their mattresses with seaweed, believing it had marine restorative powers. You're picturing it now, a bed that smells like a low-tide beach, crinkling with every move. You're glad your mattress is just horsehair. But the thought of seaweed bedding makes you wonder if Victorians were just trolling each other. Seaweed mattresses were real, especially in coastal towns, and advertised in papers like the Illustrated London News as hygienic. You're not tempted to try it. Your current setup's bad enough, and you don't need to add smells like fish to your problems. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Victorian mattress fail? Because it was too busy horsing around. Okay, back to your bedding battle. The pillows are no better. Flat, lumpy, and stuffed with feathers that poke like tiny daggers. You've got two, because some doctor said multiple pillows elevate the head for better dreams. All they're elevating is your frustration. You try stacking them, then switching to one, but it's like choosing between a rock and a slightly softer rock. The bed curtains, heavy velvet things meant to block drafts, are suffocating, trapping heat and making you feel like you're sleeping in a fancy tomb. Historians still argue whether Victorian bedding made insomnia worse, or if people were just used to it. Studies from the era, like those in the British Medical Journal, suggested poor bedding disrupted sleep, but most folks didn't have options. Horsehair or straw was what you got unless you were rich enough for goose down. You're starting to think your bed's the real villain here, not the laudanum or the swampy herbal tea. You try flipping the mattress, a Herculean task that leaves you panting and covered in stray feathers. It doesn't help. Now you're just on a different lumpy side. Let's set the scene. You're sprawled across this miserable bed, the curtains, half open because you're too hot, the horsehair poking like it's got a personal grudge. The fog outside is so thick you can't see the street, but you hear that dog barking, because of course it's still at it. You're remembering the brandy milk's sticky warmth, the chlorodyne's weird buzz, and Madame Celeste's swinging watch. None of them stood a chance against this bed. You try a trick from a ladies' magazine, sprinkling lavender water on the sheets for calming vapors. Now your bed smells like a perfumed stable, and you're still wide awake. Here's another. Quick joke. Why was the Victorian pillow so grumpy? Because it was always getting fluffed off. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to see why bedding was such a big deal. Victorians spent half their lives in bed, yet their setups were like sleeping on a medieval torture device. Some folks tried bed warmers, metal pans filled with hot coals slid between the sheets. You give it a go, borrowing one from a neighbour, but it singes the linen and nearly sets your nightshirt on fire. Safety wasn't exactly a Victorian priority, and you're lucky to escape with just a smoky smell. By now, you're tangled in blankets, the horsehair mattress staging a full rebellion against your spine. The pillows have given up, flattening, under your head like deflated dreams. You're wondering if you should just sleep on the floor. Surely it can't be worse. The Victorians loved their elaborate beds, but they were fighting a losing battle against comfort. You're learning that insomnia wasn't just about nerves or bad tonics. Sometimes it was the bed itself, a lumpy, creaky saboteur. For now, you're still awake, the fog pressing against the window, and you're ready to try something else, anything, to escape this bedding nightmare. You're still in your Victorian bedroom, sprawled across that horsehair mattress that's less a bed and more a medieval punishment device. The fog outside is so thick, it's like the world's wrapped in cotton, but sleep's still dodging you like a pickpocket in a London alley. The lavender-scented sheets and singed linens from that disastrous bed, warmer, haven't helped, and you're starting to think your bed's cursed. You're ready to try something new, not another potion or gadget, but a dive into the Victorian, obsession with sleep schedules. Doctors and self-styled experts had a lot to say about when and how long you should sleep. and you're about to navigate their conflicting, often absurd theories to see if timing's the key to your elusive rest. Imagine yourself flipping through a stack of pamphlets, each one preaching a different sleep gospel. One, by Dr. William Banting from 1864, insists you need exactly 8 hours starting at 10 p.m. sharp because nature demands regularity. You glance at your pocket watch. It's well past midnight, so you're already failing. Another, booklet, The Art of Repose, 1872, argues for 6 hours. Claiming anything more makes you sluggish and sinful. You're not sure about sin, but sluggish sounds about right. Historically, sleep schedules were a hot topic. The Industrial Revolution's rigid factory hours forced people into unnatural rhythms, and doctors were scrambling to define the perfect sleep window. You decide to try Banting's 8-hour rule, setting your alarm for 6 a.m. and lying down at 10 p.m. the next night. Easier said than done. Your mind's buzzing with worries about tomorrow's chores, and that neighbor's dog is still barking like it's auditioning for the apocalypse. You toss and turn, the horsehair mattress poking you like it's keeping score. By 2 a.m., you're still awake, wondering if 6 hours might be the magic number instead. You try again the next night, aiming for a midnight start. But the city's noises, clattering carriages, drunken shouts, make regularity feel like a cruel joke. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorians believed in biphasic sleep, splitting their rest into 2 chunks, like a 4 a.m. nap and an evening snooze. Diaries from the 1870s describe people waking at midnight to read or pray, then sleeping again. You give it a shot, setting your candle to burn out halfway through the night. You wake at 3 a.m., groggy and confused, and try reading a dull sermon to bore yourself back to sleep. It doesn't work. Now you're just annoyed at both the sermon and your flickering candle. Biphasic sleep sounds like a scheduling nightmare, and you're not cut out for it. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Victorians sleep in shifts? Because their bed was too cranky for a full night. Okay, back to your schedule struggle. You're starting to see why these theories clashed. Everyone had an opinion, but nobody had proof. One doctor, Edwin Lee, swore by sleeping from 9 p.m. to 5 a.m., claiming it aligned with solar rhythms. You try it, dragging yourself to bed early, but the sun's not your problem. It's the gas lamps burning late and your brain refusing to shut off. You're lying there, counting ceiling cracks again, wondering if you're doing this wrong or if the doctors are just guessing. Historians still argue whether these sleep schedules helped or hurt. Some say the 8-hour ideal was a response to factory life, forcing bodies into unnatural patterns, while others think biphasic sleep mimicked older, pre-industrial habits. Either way, you're not thriving. Your body's clock is more like a broken pocket watch, ticking erratically. You try another tactic from a ladies' magazine, sleeping with the moon, which means going to bed at moonrise. You check the almanac, wait for the moon, and lie down at an awkward 11:17 p.m. Spoiler: the moon doesn't care, and neither does your brain. Let's set the scene. You're back in that creaky bed, the pamphlets scattered across your quilt like failed prophecies. The fog's still heavy outside, muffling the city, but that dog's bark cuts through like a knife. You're remembering the laudanum's dancing peacocks, the swampy herbal tea, and that miserable horsehair mattress. These schedules are just another layer of frustration, like trying to herd cats with a feather. You try one last idea from a quack doctor's booklet, sleeping in short catnaps throughout the day to accumulate rest. You doze for 20 minutes in a chair, only to wake up with a crick in your neck and a fresh grudge against the world. Here's another quick joke. Why did the Victorian sleep schedule fail? Because time kept ticking them off. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to realize these schedules were less about science and more about control. Victorians loved rules, even for something as slippery as sleep. The pamphlets are full of moralizing too, saying late nights lead to depravity. You're not feeling depraved, just deprived. The era's obsession with discipline meant sleep was another thing to get right, but you're failing, spectacularly. Your body doesn't care about Banting's 8 hours or the moon's schedule. It just wants rest, and it's not getting it. By now, you're back under the heavy blankets, the bed creaking like it's laughing at you. The pamphlets are useless, and you're tempted to burn them for warmth. The fog's still thick, the room's still cold, and sleep's still a distant dream. You're learning that Victorian insomnia cures were as much about hope as they were about results, and these schedules are no exception. Maybe it's time to try something completely different, something that sounds like it belongs in a mad inventor's workshop. For now, you're still awake, the city humming faintly, and you're ready to see what other oddities this era has in store. You're back in your gloomy Victorian bedroom, the horsehair mattress still poking you like it's got a personal grudge, and those sleep schedule pamphlets are now crumpled on the floor, as useful as a broken clock. The fog outside is so dense, it's like the city's drowned in porridge, but that blasted dog's bark still pierces through, mocking your sleeplessness. The moonlit sleep schedules and biphasic naps were a bust, leaving you more exhausted than ever. You're ready to try something wilder, something that feels like it belongs in a penny dreadful. Electric cures. Yes, you're about to test bizarre electrotherapy devices marketed as insomnia fixes, because apparently Victorians thought zapping yourself was the key to a good night's rest. Picture yourself in a cluttered shop off Fleet Street, surrounded by wires, brass knobs, and gadgets that look like props from a mad scientist's lair. The shopkeeper, a twitchy man named Mr. Grimsby, swears by his electrosomnus machine, a box with coils and a hand crank that promises to stimulate restful vibrations. Electrotherapy was a Victorian fad. By the 1870s, devices like these were advertised in papers like the Illustrated London News as cures for everything from headaches to sleeplessness. You're skeptical, but after the laudanum peacocks and those swampy teas, you're willing to try anything, even if it means flirting with a mild shock. You take the contraption home, its wires dangling like a mechanical octopus. The instructions say to attach electrodes to your temples and crank the handle gently. You do it, and a faint buzz hums through your skull like a bee trapped in a jar. It's not painful, but it's definitely weird. Your hair's standing on end, and you're half expecting to glow in the dark. Historically, electrotherapy was rooted in early experiments by scientists like Michael Faraday, but by the 1870s, it was more show than science. Doctors claimed it rebalanced nervous energy, but you're just feeling jittery, like you drank too much tea. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorians used galvanic belts, battery-powered straps worn around the waist to cure insomnia. You're picturing it now, strapping on a clunky belt that buzzes like a malfunctioning doorbell, hoping it'll lull you to sleep. Grimsby tried to sell you one, but you stuck with the Somnus machine, mostly because it was cheaper. The belt was a favourite among hypochondriacs, advertised in 1878 catalogues as invigorating. You're invigorated, all right. Invigorated to chuck this thing out the window. The buzzing's giving you a headache, not a nap. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Victorian love electrotherapy? Because it shocked them into staying awake. Okay, back to your experiment. You're cranking the handle again, the buzz growing stronger, and now your fingers are tingling. The shopkeeper swore this would soothe the cerebral currents, but it feels more like you're rattling your brain like a tin of biscuits. You try lying down with the electrodes still attached, hoping the vibrations will lull you. Instead, you're hyper-aware of every creak in the bed and that dog's relentless barking outside. This is less soothing than wrestling with your horsehair mattress. Historians still argue whether electrotherapy was a medical breakthrough or a glorified placebo. Some patients reported better sleep, possibly from exhaustion after hours of buzzing, but medical journals like The Lancet in 1879 warned about burns and nerve damage. You're starting to see why. Your temples are warm, and you're wondering if you're cooking your brain. The Somnus machine's instructions mention daily use for best results, but you're not signing up for a week of this. You're remembering Dr. Pritchard's bromide, Madame Celeste's watch, and that brandy milk disaster. This electric nonsense might be the worst yet. Let's set the scene. You're back in bed, The somnus machine humming on your nightstand, its wires, tangled like your thoughts. The fog's so thick you can't see the street, but you hear that dog because of course it's still going. The electrodes are off now, your temples are tender, and you're half convinced you smell singed hair. The room's chilly, the blankets heavy, and the mattress is still a pokey traitor. You're starting to think Victorians were just throwing darts at insomnia, hoping something would stick. The electric cure's a bust, but it's got you wondering what other wild ideas they had up their sleeves. Here's another quick joke. Why was the electrotherapy machine so loud? Because it wanted to wake the neighbors too. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to see the pattern. Victorian insomnia cures were as much about spectacle as solutions. The somnus machine was sold with promises of modern science, but it's just a box of sparks and false hope. You're tempted to crank it one more time, just to see if it'll short-circuit your frustration, but you resist. The era's obsession with electricity was part of its love for progress, but progress doesn't mean comfort. You're learning that the hard way, with a tingling scalp and no sleep in sight. By now, you're back under the blankets, the machine, unplugged and shoved under the bed, where it can't judge you. The fog's pressing against the window, the room's cold, and your eyelids are as stubborn as ever. You're thinking about the mustard foot bath, the chlorodyne buzz, and those useless sleep schedules. The Victorians were desperate, just like you, but their cures are starting to feel like a parade of bad ideas. Maybe it's time to try something less shocking, something that sounds like it belongs in a sermon, not a laboratory. For now, you're still awake, the city humming faintly, and you're ready to see what's next in this sleepless adventure. You're back in your chilly Victorian bedroom, the electro-somnus machine banished under the bed, its wires tangled like the mess of your sleep-deprived thoughts. The fog outside is so thick it's like breathing soup. And that neighbor's dog is still barking, because apparently it's got a vendetta against your sanity. The electric buzz lingers in your temples, a reminder that zapping yourself was about as restful as a street brawl. You're done with gadgets and potions for now. Time to try something softer, something that smells of ink and morality. You're diving into the world of Victorian sleep advice pamphlets, those preachy little booklets that promised rest through virtue and a side of guilt. Spoiler, they're about as soothing as a lecture from your least favorite aunt. You're sitting up in bed, a stack of pamphlets on your lap, their pages yellowed and smelling faintly of mildew. Titles like The Path to Repose, 1873, and Moral Sleep for the Soul, 1870, stare back at you, each one brimming with righteous advice. These booklets were everywhere in the 1870s, churned out by clergymen and self-styled health reformers who believed insomnia was a sign of moral failure. You open one, and it's like being scolded by a vicar with a quill. It tells you to avoid idle thoughts and worldly distractions before bed. You're not sure what counts as idle, but worrying about your coal bill probably qualifies. The pamphlet's big idea is that sleep comes to the pure of heart. You're supposed to spend your evenings in quiet contemplation, preferably praying or reading scripture. You give it a try, muttering a prayer, but your mind's less contemplative and more like a runaway omnibus, crashing into thoughts about tomorrow's chores and that time you snubbed your neighbor at church. Historically, this moralizing was rooted in the era's obsession with self-discipline. Books like The Lancet, 1871, noted that religious fervor often doubled as health advice, with clergy claiming sleeplessness was God's way of saying you're not pious enough. You're not buying it, but you're desperate enough to try. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some pamphlets suggested sleeping with a Bible under your pillow to ward off restless spirits. You're picturing it now, tucking a leather-bound King James under your lumpy pillow, hoping it'll scare away insomnia like a holy ghostbuster. You try it, and it's about as comfortable as sleeping on a brick. The idea came from rural folklore, where sleeplessness was sometimes blamed on mischievous spirits. You're not sure about spirits, but your mattress is definitely possessed by something evil, given how it keeps poking you. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Victorians sleep with a Bible? because even their dreams needed a sermon. Okay, back to your pamphlet perusal. Another booklet insists you avoid exciting activities after 7 p.m., like reading novels or, gasp, playing cards. You're guilty of both, especially that dog-eared copy of Bleak House you were reading last night. The pamphlet claims novels inflame the brain, which sounds like something Dr. Pritchard would say, minus the mustache. You try skipping the book, but now you're just staring at the ceiling, wondering if counting cracks is also too exciting. Historians still argue whether these moral pamphlets helped or just piled on guilt. Some Victorians found comfort in the rituals, prayer, reflection, a pure evening routine, but others felt worse, as if their insomnia was a divine punishment. Medical journals from the 1870s started pushing back, calling the moral angle unscientific, but the public ate it up. You're not feeling comforted, just judged. The pamphlet's next tip is to write a sin list before bed to cleanse the conscience. You try it, scribbling down minor infractions like ate too much pie and cursed at dog. It's cathartic, but sleep's still playing hard to get. Let's set the scene. You're hunched over your nightstand, the candle casting jittery, shadows on the pamphlets, their preachy words blurring in your tired eyes. The fog outside muffles the city, but that dog's bark cuts through like a knife. You're remembering the laudanum's dancing peacocks, the electrosomnus buzz, and that brandy milk's sticky letdown. These pamphlets are gentler, sure, but they're also making you feel like a moral failure for not sleeping. You try another tip, singing a hymn softly to calm the soul. Your voice cracks, and the tune sounds like a funeral dirge. The dog howls back, because of course it does. Here's another quick joke. Why were Victorian pamphlets so dull? Because they put everyone to sleep, except the reader. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to see why these booklets were popular. They gave people something to do when sleep wouldn't come, even if it was just feeling guilty. The final tip is to visualize heaven as you drift off. You try picturing pearly gates and fluffy clouds, but your brain keeps swapping in that neighbor's barking dog, now wearing a halo. It's not exactly restful. The Victorians loved tying sleep to morality, but you're learning it's less about virtue and more about desperation. By now you're back under the heavy blankets, the Bible brick under your pillow making your neck ache. The pamphlets are scattered across the bed, their sermons as useless as that mustard foot bath. The fog's still thick, the room's still cold, and your eyelids are as stubborn as ever. You're starting to think insomnia's just part of being Victorian, like bad wallpaper or questionable tonics. Maybe it's time to try something new, something that considers who you are, not just what you're doing wrong. For now, you're still awake, the city humming faintly, and you're ready to explore the next odd cure in this sleepless saga. You're back in your creaky Victorian bedroom, the pamphlet's preachy words still ringing in your ears like a sermon you didn't sign up for. The fog outside is so thick it's like the city's hiding from itself. But that neighbor's dog is still barking, because apparently it's got a lifelong grudge against your sleep. The Bible under your pillow feels like a rock, and those moralizing sleep tips have left you feeling less restful and more like you've failed at being virtuous. Now you're turning to a new angle. How gender-shaped Victorian insomnia, particularly for women like you. The era's cures and expectations were different for women, and you're about to uncover a world of peculiar remedies and societal pressures that made sleepless nights even tougher for the fairer sex. Picture yourself as a Victorian woman, sitting at a vanity cluttered with hairpins and a chipped mirror, your nightgown itching against your skin. Women's insomnia was a hot topic in the 1870s. Doctors like Sir James Paget wrote in The Lancet that women were peculiarly prone to sleeplessness due to their delicate nerves. You're rolling your eyes, because apparently your gender makes you a fragile flower who can't handle a late-night thought. The reality's less poetic. You're juggling household duties, social expectations, and a corset that's left your ribs protesting. No wonder sleep's dodging you like a debt collector. You try one of the era's female-specific remedies, a soothing lavender compress for your forehead, recommended by the English Woman's Domestic Magazine, 1872. You soak a cloth in lavender water and press it to your brow, hoping it'll calm your overwrought feminine mind. It's cold, drippy, and smells like that failed lavender sheet experiment from your horsehair mattress days. The compress is supposed to balance your humours, but all it's balancing is your growing annoyance. You're starting to suspect these cures are less about sleep and more about keeping women quiet and compliant. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some doctors prescribed vibratory massage for women's insomnia, using handheld devices that looked like torture tools. You're picturing it now, a doctor cranking a contraption that shakes your shoulders, claiming it'll loosen nervous tension. You pass on that, partly because it sounds like your electrosomnus machine's evil cousin, and partly because you don't trust anyone with a crank near your neck. These devices were advertised in 1878 women's journals as gentle restoratives, but they were mostly a way to cash in on women's exhaustion. You're sticking with the compress, even if it's just making your forehead damp. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did Victorian women hate insomnia cures? Because they were tighter than their corsets. Okay, back to your struggle. The pamphlets you read earlier were bad enough, but the ones for women are worse, preaching that sleeplessness comes from immodest thoughts or neglecting domestic duties. You're supposed to keep a spotless house, raise perfect children, and look dainty while doing it, all without losing sleep. You try one tip, knitting before bed to soothe the spirit. You fumble with needles, dropping stitches, and now you're more stressed, picturing a lopsided scarf as proof of your failure. Historians still argue whether women's insomnia was medical or social. Some say the era's rigid gender roles, endless housework, constant childbearing, and pressure to be angelic, kept women awake more than biology did. Others point to hormonal shifts, poorly understood at the time, as a factor. Either way, you're feeling the weight. Society expects you to be a paragon of calm, but your mind's racing with worries. Did you order enough coal? Will your husband notice the chipped teacup? And why does that dog never shut up? The lavender compress is now a soggy mess, and you're no closer to sleep. Let's set the scene. You're back in bed, the compress discarded, your nightgown sticking to your skin from the damp. The fog outside muffles the city, but that dog's bark is relentless, like it's narrating your misery. You're remembering the laudanum's dancing peacocks, the electrosomnus buzz, and those preachy pamphlets. Women's cures feel like another layer of control telling you to be calmer, quieter, better. You try another female-specific tip, a rosewater cordial, a sweet drink meant to gentle the nerves. It tastes like perfume and sugar, and while it's nicer than the swampy herbal tea, it's not exactly sending you to dreamland. Here's another quick joke. Why was the Victorian woman's sleep so elusive? Because her corset kept her dreams laced up. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to see why women's insomnia was such a big deal. It wasn't just about sleep, but about being the perfect woman in a world that didn't let you rest. Some women turn to laudanum. You're still wary after those peacocks, while others relied on prayer or endless sewing. You try one last tip, reciting poetry to calm the feminine soul. You murmur Tennyson, but the words blur, and now you're just annoyed at how many stanzas he wrote. By now you're tangled in blankets, the rosewater cordial leaving a sticky film on your lips. The room's cold, the fog's thick, and your eyelids are as stubborn as ever. You're learning that Victorian women faced insomnia with extra baggage. Society's rules made every sleepless night feel like a personal failing. The cures were often just ways to keep you busy, not rested. Maybe it's time to look at how others, like children, dealt with sleeplessness in this era. For now, you're still awake, the city humming faintly, and you're ready to explore the next odd corner of this sleepless world. You're back in your chilly Victorian bedroom, the rosewater cordial's sticky aftertaste clinging to your lips like a sugary ghost. The fog outside is so dense it's like the city's wrapped in a wet blanket. But that neighbor's dog is still barking, because apparently it's got a personal mission to ruin your life. The women's insomnia cures, lavender compresses, poetry recitals, were just another layer of Victorian nonsense, piling expectations on top of your sleeplessness. Now, you're shifting focus to a softer, smaller corner of this restless world. Children. Victorian kids weren't spared the insomnia struggle, and you're about to explore the peculiar methods parents use to soothe their restless little ones. Spoiler: they're as odd as everything else you've tried. Picture yourself as a Victorian parent, tiptoeing into a cramped nursery where your child, let's call her Emily, is tossing in a tiny cot. The room smells of damp wood and tallow, candles, and Emily's wide awake, her eyes glinting in the dim light. Children's insomnia was a real concern in the 1870s. Parenting manuals like The Mother's Guide, 1874, warned that restless kids could grow into nervous adults. You're desperate to calm her, not just for her sake, but because if she doesn't sleep, neither do you. The era's remedies for kids were gentler than laudanum, but still weird enough to make you question Victorian logic. You start with a classic, a lullaby. You sing a soft tune, something like "Hush-a-bye, baby," your voice wobbling from exhaustion. The melodies, soothing, but Emily's not buying it. She's staring at you like you're performing off-key at a music hall. Lullabies were a staple, rooted in centuries of tradition, but they weren't always enough. You try rocking her cot, a rickety thing that creaks louder than your own bed. Parenting books claimed rocking mimicked the womb's rhythm, but all it's mimicking is your growing frustration. Emily's still awake, and you're starting to feel like a human metronome. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorian parents rubbed their kids' gums with soothing syrups laced with opium or alcohol. You're picturing it now, a bottle, labeled Mrs. Winslow's Soothing Syrup, promising peaceful slumber for teething tots. You hesitate, because after your laudanum adventure, those dancing peacocks still haunt you, you're wary of anything opiate adjacent. These syrups were wildly popular. Ads in the Illustrated London News, 1875, called them a mother's friend. But coroner's reports linked them to infant deaths from overdoses. You opt for a safer alternative, a warm cloth soaked in, chamomile tea, pressed gently to Emily's forehead. It smells better than your swampy herbal tea, but she just fusses harder. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Victorian baby stay awake? Because the lullaby was too cradle-house to sleep through. Okay, back to your nursery struggle. You try another trick from a parenting manual, wrapping Emily in a swaddling shawl to mimic a cocoon. You bundle her up, but she squirms like a tiny Houdini. And now the shawl's a crumpled heap. The idea was to make kids feel secure, but Emily's clearly not impressed. You're starting to see why parents resorted to those syrups. Desperation makes you consider wild things, even if you know better. Historians still argue whether children's insomnia was as common as adults, or if parents just noticed it more in the era's crowded, noisy homes. Some say urban life, gas lamps, street noise, and cramped quarters kept kids awake, while others point to poor diets or teething pain. Either way, you're feeling the strain. You try one more remedy, a sleep sachet filled with lavender and hops tucked into Emily's cot. It's supposed to waft her to dreamland, according to the Lady's Own paper, 1876. The sachet smells nice, but Emily just grabs it and flings it across the room. You're impressed by her aim, but not by the results. Let's set the scene. You're kneeling by the cot, your knees aching on the cold floorboards, the nursery lit by a single candle that's dripping wax like it's crying for you. The fog outside muffles the city, but that dog's bark still sneaks through, and Emily's fussing in sync with it. You're remembering your own sleepless nights, the electrosomnus, buzz, the moral pamphlet's guilt trips, the brandy milk's sticky letdown. Kids' remedies are gentler, sure, but they're not much better. You try telling Emily a story, a fairy tale about a sleeping princess, but you keep stumbling over the words, and she's more interested in tugging your hair. Here's another, quick joke. Why was the Victorian nursery so restless? Because the kids were too hopped up on hops. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to realize that children's insomnia cures were as much about comforting parents as soothing kids. The lullabies, sachets, and chamomile cloths gave you something to do, a way to feel in control when sleep was slipping away. But Emily's still awake, her tiny fists flailing, and you're wondering if you're the one who needs soothing. The Victorians loved their rituals, but they were fighting a losing battle against noisy cities and fussy babies. By now, you're back in your own bed, Emily finally quiet, not asleep, just distracted by a wooden rattle. The fog's still thick, the room's still cold, and your eyelids are as stubborn as ever. You're learning that insomnia didn't spare anyone, not even kids, and the cures were often just hopeful gestures. Maybe it's time to look at how the poorest Victorians dealt with sleeplessness. Surely their struggles will put yours in perspective. For now, you're still awake, the city humming faintly, and you're ready to dive into the next chapter of this restless saga. You're back in your creaky Victorian bedroom, the nursery's faint echoes of Emily's fussing still lingering in your mind like a stubborn tune. The fog outside is a heavy shroud, muffling London's usual din, but that neighbour's dog is still barking because apparently it's got a lifelong contract to torment you. The children's sleep remedies, lullabies, chamomile cloths, were sweet but useless, leaving you as sleepless as ever. Now, you're turning to a grimmer corner of Victorian life, the workhouses, where the poorest of the poor faced sleepless nights in conditions that make your lumpy horsehair mattress seem like a palace. You're about to endure the harsh reality of workhouse sleep, where insomnia was less a medical issue and more a brutal fact of life. Picture yourself in a dank, overcrowded workhouse dormitory, 1875, somewhere in London's East End. The air smells of unwashed bodies and damp stone, and you're crammed onto a narrow pallet, so thin it's practically a board. Workhouses were the era's solution for the destitute, housing thousands under the 1834 Poor Law. But they were designed for punishment, not comfort. You're surrounded by dozens of others, men, women, children, all coughing, snoring, or muttering in the dark. Sleep's a luxury here, and you're learning that the hard way, your body aching from a day of breaking stones or picking oakum until your fingers bled. You try to settle on the pallet, but it's stuffed with straw that's gone mouldy, prickling through the coarse sheet. The blanket's thin, patched, and smells like it's been through a dozen winters. Workhouse records, like those from the Lambeth Workhouse in 1873, describe beds as scarcely sufficient for repose, with inmates lucky to get 4 hours of sleep. You're shivering, the dormitory's windows cracked open for ventilation, letting in a damp chill that settles in your bones. The workhouse master insists fresh air prevents disease, but all it's preventing is your ability to relax. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some workhouses gave inmates a nightly gruel posset, a watery mix of oatmeal and milk supposedly to aid sleep. You're handed a chipped bowl, and it tastes like wallpaper paste with a hint of despair. The idea was to fill empty stomachs, but it's so thin it barely counts as food. You sip it, grimacing, and wonder if it's meant to bore you into slumber. Inmates often whispered about adding gin to the gruel when guards weren't looking, a rare act of rebellion. You're tempted to sneak a drop from your hidden brandy flask, left over from that nightcap disaster, but the risk of a whipping stops you. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why was the workhouse gruel so bad? Because it put even the rats to sleep. Okay, back to your grim reality. You're trying to sleep, but the dormitory's a cacophony. Someone's coughing up a lung, a child's whimpering, and the pallet next to you creaks like it's staging a protest. Workhouse rules demand silence after 9 p.m, but good luck enforcing that when everyone's too cold, hungry, or sick to rest. You try a trick you overheard, counting breaths to block out the noise. 1, 2, 3, then a snore from across. The room ruins it. You're back to square one, staring at the cracked ceiling. Historians still argue whether workhouse insomnia was caused by physical hardship or mental strain. Some say the brutal conditions, hard labor, meager food, kept bodies too weak to sleep properly, while others point to the constant fear of punishment or illness. Reports from the 1870s, like those in the British Medical Journal, noted high rates of nervous exhaustion among inmates. You're feeling it now. your mind racing with thoughts of tomorrow's grueling tasks. The gruel's sitting like a stone in your stomach, and the straw pallets digging into your back, reminding you of your own horsehair mattress's betrayal. Let's set the scene. You're curled up on the pallet, the blanket barely covering you, the dormitory's damp walls glistening in the faint moonlight. That dog's bark is gone. You're too far from your neighborhood now. But the workhouse has its own soundtrack, coughs, groans, and the occasional sob. You're remembering the laudanum peacocks, the electrosomnus buzz, and Emily's nursery tantrums. Those seem almost cozy compared to this. You try another inmate tip, tucking your hands under your armpits for warmth. It helps a little, but sleep's still a distant dream, like a memory from someone else's life. Here's another quick joke. Why did the workhouse bed creak? Because it was complaining louder than the inmates. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to see why. Sleep was so rare here. Workhouses weren't built for rest, but for survival, and barely that. Some inmates resorted to chanting prayers, hoping faith would bring peace. You try it, whispering a half-remembered hymn, but the words falter when a nearby cough interrupts. The workhouse's harshness makes your own insomnia feel almost privileged. At least you've got a bed, not a pallet, and no one's forcing you to pick oakum at dawn. By now, you're back in your own bedroom. The workhouse, a grim vision that makes your lumpy mattress feel like a small mercy. The fog's still thick outside, the room's cold, and your eyelids are as stubborn as ever. You're learning that insomnia hit hardest at society's edges, where comfort was a fantasy and cures were non-existent. Maybe it's time to see how the other half lived, those fancy aristocrats with their lavish bedrooms. For now, you're still awake, the city's faint hum seeping through the fog, and you're ready to explore the next strange chapter of this sleepless world. You're back in your creaky Victorian bedroom, the workhouse's grim palette still haunting your thoughts like a bad dream you can't shake. The fog outside is so thick, it's like the city's trying to smother itself, and your horsehair mattress, pokey as it is, feels like a luxury compared to that mouldy straw. The neighbor's dog is back at it, barking like it's got a personal grudge against your sanity. The workhouse showed you how insomnia hit the poor hardest, but now you're flipping to the other extreme, the lavish bedrooms of Victorian aristocrats. You're about to visit their opulent estates, where sleep aids were as extravagant as their wallpaper, but just as ineffective. Spoiler, even money couldn't buy a good night's rest. Picture yourself in a grand country manor, the kind owned by a lord with more titles than sense. The bedroom's a cathedral of luxury. Silk drapes, mahogany four-posters, and a feather mattress so deep you could sink to Narnia. It's 1875, and you're a guest of Lord Worthington, whose estate sprawls across acres of manicured lawns. The bed's piled with goose-down quilts and a fire crackles in a marble hearth, casting a warm glow on gilded wallpaper. This is the height of Victorian splendor. The Illustrated London News, 1876, described such bedrooms as palaces of repose. But you're still tossing, because even this plush setup can't outsmart your insomnia. You try one of the aristocrats' favorite sleep aids, a velvet slumber mask lined with lavender. It's like slipping a perfumed pillowcase over your eyes, and it smells better than that swampy herbal tea you choked down earlier. The mask's supposed to block light and soothe the optic nerves, according to a 1874 lady's journal. It's cozy, but the silk keeps slipping, and you're hyper-aware of the fire's crackle and a distant clock chiming every quarter hour. Aristocrats loved their gadgets. Historical records show they spent fortunes on imported sleep aids, from French eye masks to German restorative cushions. You're not impressed. The mask's just making you sweat. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some lords used aromatic vaporizers, brass contraptions that puffed scented steam to purify the sleep atmosphere. You're picturing it now, a hissing machine on the nightstand, filling the room with rosewater mist like a floral fog machine. Lord Worthington's got one, and you give it a try, turning a tiny crank. It sputters, and now the room smells like a perfumer's shop exploded. It's less soothing than overwhelming, and you're half expecting those laudanum peacocks to waltz back into your vision. These vaporizers were status symbols, but they were about as restful as a brass band. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the aristocrats' sleep aid fail? Because even their dreams had to bow to etiquette. Okay, back to your plush predicament. You try another aristocratic trick. A weighted quilt, stuffed with lead pellets to anchor the body for repose. It's like sleeping under a fancy anvil, and you're worried it'll crush you before it calms you. The idea came from 1870s health fads, claiming pressure soothed nerves. You're not soothed, just pinned, like a butterfly in a collector's case. The bed's still heavenly compared to the workhouse pallet, but sleep's as elusive as ever. Historians still argue whether aristocratic insomnia was real or just fashionable whining. Some say the rich, with their leisurely lives, invented nervous disorders to seem delicate, while others point to overindulgence, rich foods, late-night balls, as the culprit. Diaries from the era, like those of Lady Mary Glynn, describe sleepless nights despite lavish comforts. You're feeling it now, trapped under this weighted quilt, the vaporizer hissing like a snooty kettle. The room's too warm, the bed too soft, and your mind's racing. Did you thank Lord Worthington for dinner? Will that clock ever shut up? Even luxury can't silence your brain. Let's set the scene. You're sinking into the feather mattress, the slumber mask askew, the room thick with rosewater steam. The fire's glow dances on the wallpaper, and the fog outside muffles the estate's quiet. You're remembering the workhouse's mouldy straw, the electro-somnus buzz, and that moral pamphlet's guilt trips. This bedroom's a dream by comparison, but it's still not delivering. You try one last aristocratic cure, a sleep cordial of elderflower and champagne, served in a crystal glass. It tastes like a garden party, but it's just a fancier version of that brandy milk flop. Your stomach's bubbly, but your eyelids are defiant. Here's another quick joke. Why was the Lord's bedroom so restless? Because the luxury kept demanding an encore. Okay, let's keep going. You're starting to see why even aristocrats struggled. Too much choice, too many gadgets, and a culture that prized excess over simplicity. The cordials left you slightly tipsy, but sleep's still playing coy. You're tempted to ditch the quilt and mask, maybe sleep on the floor for a change. The Victorians, rich or poor, were united in their insomnia woes, each chasing rest with their own brand of desperation. For now, you're still awake, the manor's clock ticking, and you're ready to explore the next odd cure in this sleepless saga. You're back in your Victorian bedroom, whether in Lord Worthington's manor or your own modest lodgings, the result is the same. Wide awake, the weight of failed cures pressing heavier than that aristocratic lead quilt. The fog outside has seeped into your bones, and even the neighbour's dog has finally tired itself out, leaving you alone with the ticking of the mantel clock. Desperate for new angles, you turn to a Victorian obsession that bridged science and superstition. Dream journals. You're about to explore how scribbling down nightly visions became a bizarre sleep aid, promising to decode your restlessness one cryptic entry at a time. A leather-bound journal sits on your nightstand, its pages blank but intimidating. Dream analysis was all the rage by the 1870s, thanks to books like The Interpretation of Dreams, 1868, by Dr. John Abernethy, who claimed insomnia stemmed from unresolved dream material. You're skeptical, but you dip your pen in ink and prepare to document whatever half-formed nonsense your brain coughs up tonight. The idea is that by recording dreams, you'll purge the mind of nocturnal unrest, according to the ladies. Treasury, 1875. You're not convinced, but the ritual feels productive, like you're at least doing something about your sleeplessness. You lie back, the journal open beside you, and wait. And wait. The clock ticks louder. A carriage clatters past. Your mind drifts to tomorrow's chores. Did you order more coal? And suddenly you're jotting, dreamt of a black dog chasing a ledger book. It's not Freud, but it's a start. Victorians loved assigning meaning to dreams. Dogs were omens of dispute. Ledgers symbolized financial anxiety. You're pretty sure this just reflects your real-life worries. But Abernethy's book insists decoding symbols will quiet the subconscious. You try sketching the dog for good measure. It looks like a potato with legs. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorians used dream dictionaries to interpret symbols, with entries like teeth falling out, charm impending betrayal. You flip through the Oneirocriticon, 1871, a popular guide, and learn your ledger-chasing dog means a debt collector will vex you. Helpful. Other dreamers took it further. Mary Cornwallis West, a society lady, wrote in her 1873 diary that recurring dreams of flying kites meant she'd soon escape marital tedium. She divorced 2 years later. You're not sure your potato dog holds such weight, but the act of writing feels oddly soothing, like confessing to a silent friend. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Victorian keep a dream journal? Because even his subconscious needed a strict schedule. Okay, back to your scribbling. The journal's piling up with fragments. A staircase that goes nowhere. A peacock in a waistcoat. Those laudanum flashbacks again. One entry reads simply, "Why is there a hat there?" Victorian psychologists argued that absurd dreams were the mind's way of venting excess mental energy. You're venting, all right, into this journal, which is now less a sleep aid and more a surrealist art project. Historians still argue whether dream journals helped or just gave insomniacs another thing to obsess over. Studies in the British Medical Journal, 1877, noted some patients slept better after unburdening their minds, while others fixated on interpretations, spiraling into fresh anxiety. You're straddling both camps. The writing is calming, but now you're Googling waistcoat-wearing peacock symbolism at 3 a.m. Wait, no Google, just frantic dictionary flipping. The ritual's comfort is undercut by the pressure to find meaning in every nonsense image. That hat still haunts you. Let's set the scene. You're hunched over the journal, ink smudging your fingers, the candle guttering as the fog presses against the window. The bed's a mess of crumpled pages, and your handwriting's deteriorating into sleepy squiggles. You're remembering the aristocratic vaporizer's floral fog, the workhouse's gruel, and Dr. Pritchard's bromide. This journal's gentler, but it's not a cure, just a distraction. You try one last tip from the Dreamer's Almanac, drawing a portal door in the margin before bed to invite purposeful dreams. Yours looks like a lopsided biscuit tin. You stare at it, willing sleep to come. Here's another quick joke. Why did the dream journal fail? Because its author kept waking up to write, "I forgot my dreams." Okay, let's keep going. By now the journal's full of half-baked visions and doodles, and you're no closer to sleep. The Victorians saw dreams as puzzles to solve, but you're just piling up more questions. That dog, that hat, that endless staircase, they're not clues to your insomnia, they're symptoms of it. You close the journal, blow out the candle, and lie back. The clock ticks, the fog swirls, and you're still awake, wondering if the next cure will be the one that finally works. You're back in your Victorian bedroom, the dream journal now a chaotic testament to your sleepless nights. Its pages filled with more doodles than revelations. The ink stains on your fingers mock you like tiny badges of failure. Outside, the fog has lifted slightly, revealing a sliver of moon that seems to wink at your exhaustion. Desperate for new answers, you turn to an eerie corner of Victorian sleep culture. Superstitions. From charms to bedtime rituals, the era was rife with folk beliefs designed to ward off restless nights. You're about to tiptoe through this shadowy world where logic surrenders to the supernatural, all in pursuit of elusive slumber. A small velvet pouch sits on your nightstand, given to you by an elderly neighbor who swore it contained a sleep charm. You loosen the drawstring and pour out its contents. A shriveled sprig of rowan berries, a scrap of parchment with a psalm scrawled in shaky ink, and, alarmingly, what looks like a cat's whisker. Victorian folklore held that rowan wards off evil spirits, psalms purify the air, and cat whiskers. Well, no one's quite sure, but your neighbor insisted it steals the alertness of a waking creature. You place the pouch under your pillow, trying not to think about the ethics of feline theft. You light a stubby, drowsy candle bought from an apothecary, its wick infused with hops and poppy seeds. As it burns, the room fills with a sweet, soporific scent that's undercut by the lingering musk of the horsehair mattress. Superstition meets commerce here. These candles were advertised in the penny illustrated paper, 1876, as guaranteed to summon Morpheus, though small print admitted they worked best when combined with a tranquil mind. Yours is currently racing through doubts. What if the cat wants its whisker back? The flame flickers, casting shadows that look suspiciously like a disapproving tabby. Here's a quirky tidbit. Some Victorians slept with scissors under their beds to cut through nightmares. You fish out a pair from your sewing kit and slide them beneath the mattress, though the metallic snick of the blades makes you flinch. Rural legends claimed this trick severed invisible threads of worry spun by nocturnal fairies. Urban sophisticates mocked the practice until the Times, 1878, reported a clergyman's wife who swore it cured her night terrors. You're not convinced, but at this point you'd bargain with a fairy if it meant an hour of sleep. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the Victorian refuse to sleep without his scissors? Because he wanted to be sharp in the morning. Okay, back to your charm-laden bed. You recite a rhyme from an 1870s chapbook. When stars do blink and owls call, lay thee down and fear no thrall. Four corners round, four angels bound, no wicked sprite shall here be found. It's less poetic when you forget the lines and mumble, no wicked, sprites, mice. The ritual's supposed to mark the bed as a sacred space, but you're pretty sure you just invited chaos with that botched incantation. Historians still argue whether these superstitions offered placebo comfort or exploited desperation. Folklorists note that charms often contained herbs with mild sedative effects, like the poppy in your candle, while anthropologists point to their psychological power. Believing in protection might ease anxiety. You're straddling both theories, eyeing the scissors poking from under the bed. The candle sputters, and for a moment, you swear you hear a faint snip-snip. Probably just the wind. Probably. Let's set the scene. You're curled under the quilt, the charm pouch lumpy under your ear, the scissors glinting in the dying candlelight. The moon's glow outlines the window pane, and the neighbour's dog, blessedly, remains silent. You're remembering the dream journal's nonsense, Lord. Worthington's lead quilt and Madame Celeste's pocket watch. This superstition feels older, stranger, like tapping into something primal. Your eyelids grow heavy. Is it the poppy candle, the stolen cat's alertness, or just exhaustion finally winning? Here's another quick joke. Why did the sleep charm fail? Because the cat wanted its whisker back with interest. The candle burns out, the room darkens, and for the first time in hours, maybe nights, you feel sleep pulling you under. Whether by charm or chance, you drift off, the scissors silent, the psalm crumpled, and the rowan berries forgotten. You're back in your Victorian bedroom. Or rather, you were asleep until the church bells clanged at some ungodly hour. Literally, it's 3 a.m., jolting you awake like a bucket of ice water. The charm pouch is stuck to your cheek. The scissors have migrated to your foot. How? And the cat whisker is lost forever in the bedding. But for a few blissful hours, you slept. Now, groggy and disoriented, you cling to the edges of that fragile victory, while the Victorian world offers one. Last insomnia cure, the era's fledgling sleep science. Forget folk charms and electroshocks. Tonight, you're exploring the birth of modern sleep studies, where men in stiff collars tried to quantify the unquantifiable with rulers, stopwatches, and sheer stubborn optimism. A pamphlet titled The Physiology of Sleep, 1879, by Dr. Henry C. Wood slides off your nightstand. You fumble for your spectacles, they're on your head, and squint at diagrams of cerebral repose that look like a drunk spider's web. Wood and his peers were pioneers, arguing that insomnia wasn't moral failure or fairy curses, but a biological puzzle. Their tools were crude, measuring pulse rates, charting breathing patterns, but revolutionary. You try their methodical respiration technique. Inhale for 4 counts, hold for 7, exhale for 8. By the third cycle, you're lightheaded and gasping like a landed trout. The pamphlet insists this oxygenates the brain for slumber. Your brain, meanwhile, is screaming for air. Here's a quirky tidbit. Early sleep scientists strapped volunteers to boards to study posture's effect on rest. You're not trying that, but you do attempt Wood's optimal sleep angle. Lying, on your right side with one pillow under your knees. It feels absurd, like posing for a medical textbook. A gruff footnote adds, "Avoid left side sleeping, as it presses upon the heart and excites dreams of an unpleasant nature." You flip to your left just to rebel. Take that, Dr. Wood. Let's lighten things up with a joke. Why did the sleep scientist get fired? He kept dozing off during the awakening experiments. You dig deeper into the pamphlet's marginalia, where a Dr. Forbes Winslow claims insomniacs should avoid all nocturnal emissions of light, including fireflies, in London in 1879. More practical advice follows. Keep the bedroom at 60 degrees Fahrenheit. Good luck without a thermostat. Eat a light supper. Tell that to the mutton pie you regretfully inhaled. And, this one's rich, cultivate a mind free from financial care. Ah, yes, you'll just stop worrying about rent. Revolutionary. Historians still argue whether these proto-scientists helped or hindered. Their methods were flawed. One 1875 study concluded women needed less sleep because they expended less mental energy. But they laid groundwork for modern sleep medicine. You're living proof. That breathing trick did make you drowsy, once you stopped hyperventilating. Let's set the scene. You're sprawled diagonally across the bed in defiant rejection of Wood's angles, the pamphlet crumpled under your elbow. Dawn's first grey light seeps through the curtains. The neighbour's dog is, miracle of miracles, silent. You're too tired to care about posture or pulses. Your last coherent thought, maybe insomnia isn't a puzzle to solve. Maybe it's just being human. The church bells strike 6, their bronze voices rolling across the rooftops of London. You're curled in your bed, not asleep, not quite awake, watching dust motes drift through a slant of pale morning light. The pamphlets, potions, and peculiar devices of the past nights are strewn about your room like artifacts from some failed archaeological dig. Laudanum bottles glint emptily on the windowsill. The electrosomnus machine lies in pieces where you, regrettably, kicked it at 4 a.m. That cursed cat whisker winks at you from the floorboards. You've tried everything. Everything. From aristocratic vaporizers to workhouse gruel, from moralizing sermons to scissors under the bed. And yet, here you are, hollow-eyed, cotton-mouthed, watching the city stir to life outside your window. The milkman's cart rattles down the street. A scullery maid beats a rug with violent enthusiasm. Somewhere, a baby wails. And you realize, with a slow, syrup-thick epiphany, that Victorian London simply doesn't sleep. Not really. Not the factory workers coughing through their pre-dawn shifts. Not the clerks nodding off over ledgers by gaslight. Not the society hostesses sipping chloral hydrate cocktails at midnight soirees. The entire era is running on a toxic cocktail of caffeine, obligation, and sheer stubbornness. And suddenly, perhaps it's the exhaustion, perhaps it's the last traces of that poppy seed candle, you start to laugh, a wheezing, undignified sound that shakes the bed frame. All those doctors and their bromides, those pamphleteers and their moralizing, that poor cat missing a whisker, the sheer arrogance of an empire that thought it could conquer sleep itself with gadgets and tonics and crisp white bed linens. You laugh until your ribs ache, until tears streak your cheeks, until the neighbour's dog starts barking again, of course. When the fit passes, you're left with something softer. Not sleep, not yet, but a kind of surrender. The Victorians fought their insomnia with the same relentless energy they applied to colonizing continents and building railways. But you're just a person, A tired, ridiculous person in a scratchy nightshirt, flopped on a horsehair mattress that's probably older than your grandmother. Outside, the fog burns golden as the sun rises. The city exhales. Somewhere, a shopkeeper unlocks his door. Somewhere, a child chases a hoop down the street. And here, in this quiet room heavy with the scent of burnt candle wax and lavender, you finally close your eyes. The room grows softer now, the edges blurring as sleep tugs at your sleeves. Breathe in, slowly, the faintest hint of coal smoke and beeswax. Breathe out, the tension in your shoulders, the weight of all those failed cures. The mattress cradles you, imperfect but familiar. The distant sounds of the waking world. Hooves on cobblestones, a vendor's cry, become lullabies. You tried so hard. Too hard, perhaps. But rest was never something to be conquered, was it? Not really. Not like India, or the railways, or the stars. Sleep is older than empires. Older than scissors under beds. Older than laudanum. Older than the first weary human who ever counted sheep. Let go now. Let the horsehair prickle your back. Let the curtains flutter just so. Let the warmth of your own breath steady you. There's no more to do. No potions to take. No prayers to recite. No watches to swing. Just this. The slow sink into the pillow. The heaviness of your limbs. The quiet miracle of a mind finally stilling. The Victorians would hate this, you think drowsily. All this surrender. All this softness. They'd want you to fight a little longer, to measure your pulse one more time, to journal about the odd dream you're not quite having. But you're not a Victorian anymore. You're just a body, tired and human, slipping into the oldest peace there is. The last thing you hear isn't the neighbour's dog, or the church bells, or the scratch of a pen in a dream journal. It's your own heartbeat, steady as a pendulum, counting you down, down, down.